Hello and welcome to Principles of Micro with James Bland. Today we're going to learn about a new concept called consumer surplus. And if you're playing along at home, this is where Mankiw's text, Principles of Microeconomics, jumps from a set of chapters where we learn about what happens in markets. So, the economist is a scientist kind of perspective, to working out the benefits that people can get out of participating in markets. So, how much benefit does a consumer get from participating in a market? And that's what we're going to work out today. Okay, so just as a quick refresher, here is a demand curve, and here is a consumer. Okay, and earlier in class we worked out that we can interpret the height of the demand curve as the marginal benefit that a consumer gets when they buy this particular good, right? So if, say, this is quantity for the fifth good, then there's a consumer out there that gets a benefit of this much from buying that good. Okay? But it's not the case that the consumer is paying that price, right? I've got price here on the vertical axis, but when we're talking about a demand curve, this is also plotting marginal benefit. Okay, so suppose that this consumer decides to buy an item which costs $5. Okay? But if their marginal benefit is equal to, say, $7, then they are $7 minus $5 better off, right? They are $2 better off than had they not bought that item, right? They bought something which they valued at $7, but they only had to pay $5 for it. Okay, so they are $2 better off than had they not participated in the market and bought that item. Okay, so this is the consumer surplus for one trade, and we're going to work out how we can determine what benefit all consumers get out of participating in a market. And to do this, I'm going to work you through the example in Chapter 7 of Mankiw that starts with Table 1. So this is Chapter 7, Table 1, where we have a table describing 4 buyers. These people are called John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Go and look them up. They're pretty amazing people. And they each have a willingness to pay for an item. Okay, so John values this item at $100. Paul values this item at $80. George values the item at $70, and Ringo values it at, at $50. Okay, so what we're going to do here is think about a few different prices and work out how much benefit these buyers would get if the price of this item were equal to some particular values. Okay, so just looking at this to start off with, we can work out a few things straight away. So, right, if the price is above $100, nobody buys. Okay, and if the price is less than or equal to $50, everyone buys. Okay, but somewhere in between, are going to be situations where 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these people buy the good. Okay, so let's start by working out what happens if the price, I'll go to a different color here just so you can see this example. If the price is equal to, let's say, $75. Okay. Now, if the price is equal to $75, all the consumers who value the item at greater than $75 are going to buy the item, and everyone who values it less than $75 is going to not buy the item. So remember, willingness to pay here is also going to be marginal value. Okay, so who's going to buy the item at a price of $75? Okay, well, Ringo values the item at $50. He's not going to pay $75 for this item. Same thing with George. Too expensive. George does not want to buy the item for $75. Okay, but Paul values the item at $80, so he's $5 better off from buying the item, and John values it at $100, and so he benefits from buying the item, right? He buys something for $75, which he valued at $100, and so he's going to buy the item, and he's going to be $25 better off. Okay, so from here we can work out that John is 100 minus $75 better off than had he not bought the item, and Paul is 80 minus $75 better off. Okay, so, I mean, if we work these out, this is saying that John is $25 better off and Paul is $5 better off. Okay, so in total, if the price was $75, then consumers as a whole are going to be $25 plus $5, which is $30 better off than had the market not existed. Okay, so let's have a think about what this looks like in terms of a demand curve. Okay, so I'm going to draw this up here now. Go back to different color. So I'm going to rewrite this table in a slightly more compact format. We've got John, Paul, George, Ringo, and we have their willingness to pay at 100, 80, 70, and 50. Okay, so this demand curve is going to look a little bit funny because it's not a curve, but it's going to be downward sloping. Okay, so a few things to note about this set of willingnesses to pay. So we can think about this as a demand schedule. We have 4 potential buyers, and each one of them only wants to buy at most 1 unit, right? They either want to buy something or not buy it. Okay, so the quantity is either going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, we're not going to get quantities greater than that. Okay, these are the only consumers in the market. Okay, the price is either going to be, well, the interesting prices where things are going to happen are going to be either 100, I'm going to put 50 in here because that'll be halfway down. And then we've got 70, which is about here, and 80, which is about here. Okay, it's not entirely to scale, but it's not too bad either. Okay, so something interesting is going to happen at these prices and at these quantities. Okay, so let's see if we can work out the demand curve. Let's go to a different color here. Okay, so if the price is above $100, no one's going to buy the good. This means the demand curve lines up with the vertical axis, right? So the demand curve is here. Now at a price of 100, John is indifferent between buying the good and not. So a price of 100, it might be that John doesn't want to buy the good. He doesn't really care. He might pay $100 for something he values at 100, or he might not. Or he might buy the good. Okay, so up here, got this demand curve, which is going to come out like this, right? Here, only John is buying the good. Okay. Now, for prices between 100 and 80, for prices between $100 and $80, John is definitely going to buy the good, but it's not quite attractive yet for Paul to buy the good. Okay, so for prices between $100 and $80, John buys the good, so that pins down our horizontal coordinate of 1. And Paul, once we get to a price of 80, just becomes indifferent between buying and not. Okay, so at a price of 80, Paul could either buy nothing or buy one item. But then when the price is between 80 and 70, he will definitely buy the good. And so we can continue doing the graph like this for both George and Ringo. And once the price gets below 50, well, everyone's definitely buying, but, well, we've run out of consumers, so this means that the demand curve is going to go down to, go down to 0 right here. Okay, so now that we have this demand curve, let's work out how we could find out the benefits that John, Paul, George, and Ringo could get from participating in a market if we had particular prices. So remember, going from our demand schedule up here to our demand curve, what we're really doing is we're lining up our consumers from highest willingness to pay to lowest willingness to pay, and then working out at what point someone else starts buying. So, I mean, this first part here was due to John, and down here is Paul, here is George, and here is Ringo. Okay, so now let's pick a price, and in reality this would be a result of a supply curve intersecting somewhere here, and work out what are the benefits people get from participating in the market when the price is equal to a particular value. Okay, so let's pick a price of somewhere in here, say $75, and so here it is. Okay, so here we can see that John values the item at $100, but only had to pay $75 to get it. So he got a benefit of $25. Okay, And note that on the graph, we can see the $25 as the height between the price and the height of the demand curve corresponding to John's willingness to pay, right? So here's our $25 in here. And also Paul saw a price of $75 and thought, well, I'm $5 better off if I buy this item than don't. So Paul gets a benefit of this height here, which is $5. Okay. But also note here that since the widths of these horizontal parts, right, so along here, that length is 1, then $25 is also a value minus a price, right, a value minus a cost, multiplied by a quantity, okay? So John's benefit from participating in the market when the price is 75 is equal to this area here. And Paul's benefit from participating in the market, right, he's paying the same price, he gets a different benefit, and he's still buying a quantity of 1, is going to be equal to this area here. Right, so this total shaded area here is called the consumer surplus. And we're evaluating this when people are trading at a price of $75. Okay? Well, what if we got a different price? How about I go to a different color while we're doing this? Okay, so let's put in a different price. Let's try a price of $40, right, down here. Again, not entirely to scale, but if I drew this to scale, it might get a little bit more messy. Okay, so here's our price of $40. And now a whole lot of things are happening. So firstly, if John was going to buy the good at $75, if the price went down to $40, he's still going to buy the good, right? He's not going to change his behavior, but now he gets a much larger benefit from buying the good, right? He's still getting $100 of value from owning the good, and now he's only giving up $40 to get it. Okay, so John's benefit from participating in the market when the price is $40 is now going to be equal to the area of this rectangle. Okay, how am I going to shape this one? Like this. Okay, so John got a benefit now of $100 minus $40, which is going to be $60. Likewise, Paul would have bought the good for $75, but now the price has gone down to $40, and so he's not going to change his behavior. If it was a good idea for him to buy the good at $75, well, he's still going to buy it if the price goes down to $40. Right? You don't just like not buy a house if the house gets cheaper and you would have paid more money for it. Okay, so Paul's benefit from participating in the market is going to be equal to this rectangle here. And remember here we have the height of this rectangle, right? This height of the rectangle here, that's Paul's benefit minus the cost that Paul gave up to get the item, which is the price. And then the horizontal part of this rectangle is how much did Paul buy, right? How many items? And here we're just assuming it's going to be 1. So Paul's benefit here is 80 minus 40, so this area here is going to be $40. Okay. But it's not just that people who are already buying the good at the higher prices are not changing their behavior and benefiting. It's that some people who didn't buy the good at the higher price are now changing their behavior to buy the good. Okay, so at $40, this is this is an item that George wants to buy now, right? So George gets a benefit of $70, and he's definitely willing to give up $40 to get that $70 benefit, right? So this is a $30 net benefit here to George. So George's surplus from participating in this market is going to be equal to this area here, which is $30. And with Ringo, well, he gets $50 benefit from owning the item, and he's paying $40, so this height here, this difference here is $10. He's bought one of them, and so his benefit here is $10. So remember, up here, these green rectangles extend into the blue ones up here. So the total green area here is going to be our consumer surplus, at a price of $40. Okay, all right, that's a 0. Okay, so that's all very well and good with a kind of stepwise demand curve that we set up here with just these 4 consumers, but with most of the problems we're dealing with in Principles of Micro, our demand curves look more like this. Okay, so how do we work out consumer surplus when we have a smooth demand curve? Okay, so we could have a smooth demand curve for a few reasons. One reason is we could have a whole lot of consumers that either want to buy one item or no item, in which case the demand curve indeed would have this stepwise shape. It's just we'd be zoomed out so much that it would look smooth. On the other hand, we could be dealing with a good that you can buy in continuous quantities. Like, rice is a discrete good, but, you can, if you're scooping it out of a box or something, the number of grains of rice is a reasonably continuous number. Or if you're buying gasoline or something like that. Okay, so we get demand curves like this all the time, and to be honest, they're easier to draw. So how do we deal with consumer surplus in a situation like this? Okay, well, let's start out with, if I can switch colors here, suppose that consumers are able to buy this good at this particular price here. Okay, now we know that the demand curve here, the height of the demand curve, is going to represent the marginal value, and so what this tells us is that there is a consumer on this part of the demand curve that has a marginal value of this much, okay, and they're able to buy the good for this much, right? So they get a benefit, a net benefit of this height, okay? And there's also another consumer, right? A whole lot of consumers here, but there's also another consumer on this part of the demand curve who has this marginal value for buying the good, but they're still only paying this price, right? So they get this benefit, right? So if you want to put some numbers on this, suppose that the price in this market is $10, and up here, this consumer's marginal value is $15. This consumer's marginal value is $20. Okay? And so essentially what we need to do is we need to add up all of these consumers' individual surpluses to get to market surplus. And remember, there are going to be some consumers down here who have a marginal value below the price, and so they're not going to buy the good. We don't want to count them in our calculations. Okay, so what we're going to do is to add up all of these benefits. Okay, so while I try not to teach calculus in my course, if you're a calculus person and it's helpful to you, essentially what we're going to do is to integrate the area between the price and the demand curve for the part of the demand curve where people are buying the good, right? So we don't want to count this bit out here, but we want to count all of the marginal benefits of the people who actually bought the good, okay? If you're not a calculus person, you can think about this, you can think about this as adding up a whole lot of different net benefits in here, okay? So how are we going to do this? Oh, and I've lost my vertical axis now. How are we going to do this with our smooth demand curve? Well, we're going to do it by calculating the area between the demand curve and the price consumers pay. Okay, so looking back at our chapter on taxes, the price that's relevant to consumers is the price that they're paying. So really what we're saying here is this is the price consumers pay. Okay, and so we need to work out the area between the demand curve and the price consumers pay that's to the left of the quantity that consumers are buying. Okay, so this area here is called the consumer surplus. It's measured, if we're using currency in dollars, then it's measured in dollars. And it tells us the total benefits that all consumers get out of participating in the market. Okay. In my next lecture, we're going to do something similar to this with producers. And then we're going to find out, well, how much better off is society, at least with this measure, from this market existing, right? We're going to add up the surplus of consumers and producers, and that tells us how much better off we are from having this market. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm James Bland, and I'll see you later.